Heidi ho, everybody. So today is Wednesday, May 29th, and we are bringing you Block Digest 178 at block height 578,394. So what is up today, everybody?
Oh, nothing much. Been a pretty good day. Just getting things started. How about you, Nopar? What's going on?
Oh, I've been using Wasabi on OS X for a week or two now, and I have to apologize for every OS X Wasabi users. Seriously, the last release was like, fuck. Anyway, we were actually not adding features, just fixing stability issues. So the next release will be good. Sorry again.
I know how to fix that. Take your MacBook, throw it in the garbage, and get a ThinkPad and put Linux on it.
Just get a ThinkPad. But yeah, like definitely get rid of OS X. I mean, but yeah, it's a good thing that you're experimenting around with that, getting that all solved up for everybody. I'm sure a lot of people that are using that unfortunate operating system will be pleased to hear that. Janine, how are you doing today?
Well, as everyone should know, this is the eve before the major extradition hearing tomorrow, which is actually just procedural, but it is a hearing about Julian Assange's extradition. And for some reason, instead of, people thinking, oh, maybe we should pay attention to, defending a journalist against, a powerful, abusive government. Instead, they've decided to fight amongst themselves on Twitter about whether we care that a bunch of developers allegedly left Bitcoin to work on Ethereum at some point, at some time. Who cares? So I took about 30 seconds to look at all those threads, and then I decided that I have better things to do. Goodbye.
Yeah. So I think we should talk about this for a minute, even though it's not a proper story, and we're not putting links to shit in the show notes. But that was just like beyond absurd. Like Lee Quinn, I think is how you pronounce her name, from CoinDesk, made a tweet about some harassment issues she was having working at CoinDesk, which has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the wider Bitcoin community. And then all of a sudden, not just that. Then Neil Woodfine put out a tweet storm pretty much going, Bitcoin is a highly adversarial thing. If you can't integrate into the community, air quote, because there is no such thing, then the problem is you, because this is just necessarily how things function. It has to be highly critical. It has to be a very high degree of skepticism. So if you can't handle that, well, that's on you. And then everybody took these two things and springboarded with a seed that had nothing to do with Bitcoin into just full-on retardedness and finger pointing and screaming, you're being toxic, no, you're being toxic. And Matt Corello even went so far as to say that he was ashamed to have co-founded Blockstream because of how Samson Mao acts. And the only thing Samson tweeted since Lee's thread was a tweet that said something like, Bitcoin doesn't care whose feelings got hurt or is offended. And it just evolved into full-on complete and utter stupidity. And, like Janine just said, we have the whole situation with Assange still unfolding. Or like Rick covered in the last episode, the Financial Action Task Force is trying to coordinate international AML KYC standards to impose on exchanges all over the globe, and even potentially try to push that beyond just exchanges. And right now, everybody is caught up in whining that you're being a meanie on Twitter. Like it's like, frankly, like one of the only two tweets I put out, it sorts your fucking priorities out, dumb shit. Like who gives a fuck if somebody's being a meanie on Twitter? There are actual problems going on right now that people should put their attention towards.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I caught a couple of those threads and I kind of just stopped reading a little bit down into it and was like, yeah, I've got more important things to do on my plate right now that I'm working on. And sometimes, Twitter is definitely, it's like one of those base layers of communication within the space, but sometimes it can definitely be ultimately just a big distraction. And I can understand why, a good amount of people don't really even participate in the Twitter discussions anymore because it just, there are a lot of important things to do and stuff that requires your mind share if you're trying to get a lot of things done. And that sort of drama is just, it's just bleeding that away from you.
Of course, due to CoinDesk's corrupt business model, they managed to get an article out of this whole thing. So good for them. So what apparently, so I do, yeah, I mean, I do just want to say, like, if there are any legitimate allegations, those should be corrected, and they wouldn't surprise me at all because any kind of person who manages or stomachs the kind of business model that CoinDesk and other crypto media outlets run, it doesn't surprise me that they would end up being terrible people. So if that's what it has to do with, then we'd love to hear more. But I am not going to spend days and days reading through Twitter threads about people sniping at each other.
No, it's a simple, well-tried business model. You manufacture bullshit and then you cover it. And I mean, that's
Exactly.
not to downplay anything that Lee experienced at CoinDesk, but any problem she had with her fellow employees at her place of business has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Bitcoin ecosystem. So when you have situations like that, address them in the proper context instead of starting shit fits on Twitter in the wider ecosystem to get attention and clicks and drive revenue for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to downplay the fact that if somebody was, in a wronged position that they shouldn't be able to stand up for themselves, but definitely put it in context because you broad stroke like, oh, this is Bitcoin. It's like, dude, there's so many people in Bitcoin and you're just going to be like, well, that's the way, this aspect of Bitcoin runs. It's like, no, that's with who you communicate with in Bitcoin. And, if you need to change that up, then that's something that you need to do. And yeah. All right, let's get out of this drama and
choo-choo.
Yeah, the train is leaving the station. Let's dig into this a little bit because, there's some bigger stuff going on like we're talking about. So let's start off today with a good reminder why Bitcoin is necessary for the near future. I'm, of course, talking about the gross overuse of censorship across all platforms, which includes the form of banking censorship. We talked earlier this year about the deplatforming of famous social media characters like Sargon of Akkad, where the onerous for the censorship was placed on the foot of MasterCard. Now we've got a little bit of an update from a story we brought you back in episode 156. At that time, we were discussing Chase Bank shutting down accounts for Proud Boys chairman Enrico Tarrio, along with a few other well-known conservative voices like Joe Biggs, Laura Loomer, and Martina Markota. All of these people lost their ability to route value for their political views, and now it looks like this was just the beginning. Last week in Chicago, JPMorgan Chase had their shareholders meeting where conservatives were waiting to ask Jamie Dimon about all the recent censorship. David Alamasi, VP of conservative-leaning National Center for Public Policy Research, said, quote, If Jamie Dimon can't absolutely guarantee that Chase Bank won't ever discriminate against conservatives, conservatives should consider banking elsewhere, close quote. Alan Massey is not alone in his concerns over the recent developments with Chase censorship, thinking this was only known because of the individual celebrity status. While there could be a larger purge of conservative accounts affiliated with right-leaning causes yet to be made public. When questioned about this topic at the shareholders' meeting, Dimon assured everyone that the bank has not pulled any more customer accounts, but he stopped short of saying they wouldn't do it in the future. While there is no immediate evidence of hidden blacklists, Alan Massey was able to tell Dimon he had circumstantial evidence that other people lost their bank accounts. Dimon had this response for the line of questioning about censorship at Chase, quote, very directly, we have not and do not debank people because of their political views. We have not and do not. And we debank people because they are DSA, AML, KYC, or unable to meet regulatory type of requirements for them, close quote. So the people attending were not satisfied with this answer, and rightfully so. So it does sound like he skirted the question without attacking the heart of the problem. It's hard to see what common thread there was outside of political views for the initial censorship. Instead, the bank leans on their regulations to say it was because of their inability to provide certain information. One of the attendees handed a Chase employee the book 1984 to in turn hand over to Dimon. It's a fitting story for our current predicament, and I imagine someone like Jamie Dimon would just laugh about his seat within this new paradigm. But we should take stock and remember that this is one of Bitcoin's big use cases. One day we will see a large group of political banking refugees making their way into Bitcoin. It's upsetting to see people have hard times routing value and managing daily transactions, but hopefully these people will learn ahead of the curve about Bitcoin's ability to help them. Because one day this censorship is going to ramp up to a level that will have the masses rushing towards us like a freight train. I just hope we'll be ready for them. So yeah, that's basically what's going on with the whole JPMorgan Chase Manhattan Bank censorship story we covered just not too long ago. So you guys have any comments on Dimon's comments?
Yeah, I think that is just some of the most obviously transparent horseshit I've ever heard in my life. Like, these are people running legal businesses with legal identities, legal residency status, and citizenship in this country. Like, what criteria are they unable to meet in terms of KYC or AML like laws? Like, they're not tied to violent criminal groups. They're not tied to terrorist organizations. They are not illegal immigrants who are unable to produce documentation regarding their citizenship or their residency in this country. Like, that's absolutely fucking absurd to attempt to put out excuses like that to just brush off the number of people who had their accounts shut down. And again, like, I'll remind everybody listening that it was not just the business accounts associated with the business selling conservative related swag and paraphernalia. It was their personal bank accounts. So like this is just obvious horseshit. And given that answer, you're 100% right, Rick. Like, this is going to keep happening. Like, this is not the last time we're going to hear something like this.
Yeah, man. I mean, hearing this sort of, point being brought back from Dimon about, well, this has just got to do with KYC, AML, yes. It's just, how can you not listen to that and think like, yeah, we're putting a lot of this stuff into Bitcoin and, not into Bitcoin, but a lot of the Bitcoin infrastructure is taking on these sort of practices. And it's just like a matter of time before we start seeing them make the same case. And yeah, it's just, it's something we've got to keep working around. I mean, there's a story a little bit later we'll talk about where, it's a similar thing where, there's just censorship going on at a large level, and people have to figure out a way to get people into the Bitcoin system without going that route. And it's difficult whenever, the forces involved are pretty powerful that want everybody to be marked and tagged in this ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, like, Janine, no part. Do I have to institute the comment toll again?
Come on, it's Jamie Dimon. You could just say, I don't want to talk about that doo-doo head or something.
No, I mean, Jamie was for a very long time now very, very against Bitcoin. I can still remember his exact words, that what he was saying about Bitcoin a couple of years ago, that it's never gonna happen. They are not gonna let it. This is crazy. And like, he doesn't seem like a guy who has, like, principles. So I don't really expect much from him. I mean, his daughter has some good. We are hearing some good things about his daughter concerning Bitcoin, but I mean, Jamie is probably the closest thing that you can call as a bankster. Like he's like a archetypical person of a bankster. He's you can't really expect much from him.
Yeah, definitely. That's where I was saying he's probably just laughing about the fact that, like him actually reading 1984 and coming out the other side of it with like a different perspective. I think, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he would just sort of laugh about the fact that he is where he is and just keep playing into that role. But Janine, if you got nothing to say about Diamond, we can just keep rolling into this stuff.
But I don't wanna.
Come on, man. You got something to tell us about this new relay protocol?
All right. So, there was a new proposal put out about 4 days ago by Gleb Numenko, Greg Maxwell, Peter Wola, Sasha Fedorova, and Ivan. I'm not even going to try this last name. I'm going to destroy it. But yeah, 5 people working on transaction relay protocol improvements for the peer-to-peer layer of Bitcoin. And, this is really a good thing to see, I think, given that a lot of the, work in relay improvements and efficiencies over the last couple years or so, they've all been concentrating on block relay, which is mostly coming from the point of view of kind of centering their concerns on miners and block propagation latency for miners, which can affect their revenue. If you find a block and it gets orphaned because it didn't propagate fast enough, people are losing money. And so it's kind of understandable why most of the relay efficiency has kind of been concentrating on blocks and getting that latency down as much as possible, because that's a really important aspect when it comes to the decentralization of mining. Like, you need to be able to have as low of a latency as possible to really stay competitive in the long term. But they finally moved their attentions to the relay of individual transactions throughout all the nodes in the network, and not just propagation from mining nodes. And this is really kind of important, because if you really look at the bandwidth consumption on the network, around 40% of it is pretty much, or no, actually, I think it's more like 50% of it is pretty much just relaying individual transactions. And this kind of comes down to the whole flood fill protocol that's used to actually get them around the network. Like, when you get a new transaction from some node, you effectively relay that to every single other node that you're connected to, except the one that sent it to you. And it's a 3-way protocol in terms of communications. Like, you ping the nodes next to you with a message: here's a transaction hash, do you have it? And if they don't, they send back a reply: no, give me the transaction. And then you actually relay the whole transaction. And so for each individual transaction, you have this 3-step protocol wasting bandwidth between every other node you're connected to except the one who sent you that transaction. And that really adds up if you're not operating in blocks only mode. And it's really inefficient. And it's also open to timing analysis to try to see where a transaction originated from, which is why there's actually a slight delay built into the protocol right now, as far as you get a transaction and then wait a couple of seconds before relaying it along. And so what they're trying to do with this early transaction relay protocol that's being proposed is trade off a little bit of latency so that it takes slightly longer for a transaction to get around to the entire network for a massive bandwidth savings in terms of the net amount used to actually relay things. And so effectively, when you look at the Bitcoin network, you can break nodes into 2 different classes. So you have a public node, which accepts incoming connections from other nodes, and you have private nodes, which don't. And these public nodes pretty much form the backbone of the network. Like almost all nodes out there have connections to these public nodes. And they kind of form the core of how data is being relayed around to all of the private nodes. So what this protocol is going to do is break up transaction relay into 2 parts: an actual initial relay of individual transactions, and then reconciling between nodes to kind of find out all of the transactions that one has, the other doesn't, and then batching all of that together into one message passing. And so Relay is effectively going to have this 2 steps where all of the public nodes in the network will take transactions they've just received and relay them to 8 other public nodes that they're connected to. And so no matter how many other nodes they're connected to, they're only going to relay transactions to 8 other public nodes. And then periodically, all public and private nodes are going to use the mini sketch library for set reconciliation. So like the ability to create a little bit of crypto magic to look at all of the transactions in my mempool, all of the transactions in your mempool, and then see which ones were missing from each other. And then simply exchange all of those in one go. And so what this pretty much at the end of the day allows is a 40% savings right now in bandwidth if you look at the amount of nodes each one connects to right now. And if you were to double or triple the amount of nodes each one connects to, you can actually get up to a 75% bandwidth savings. And the best thing about this is when you're looking at the latency trade-off in the way that they have defined the time increment variables for how often these things are done, you're not really seeing that much of a loss. It's I think the average goes from around 1 point something seconds for a transaction to hit the entire network to like 5 seconds with Relay. And so when you take into account the block interval of 10 minutes, I mean, that seems like a no-brainer. A couple extra seconds to save up to 75% of bandwidth. If we start increasing the number of nodes each one connects to, that's huge. And the most important thing about that is your node is more secure from being partitioned and attacked by being cut off from the rest of the network the more connections you have. So saving this bandwidth allows us to make the network overall more robust and more secure. And really the only substantial downside of this, in my opinion, is when it comes to spy nodes trying to actually identify where a transaction originated from. So when you're looking at private nodes that are spying, so ones that don't accept incoming connections, the bigger a percentage of the network that those private spy nodes make up, around 10% of the network being private spy nodes, you start seeing the Relay protocol actually make it a bit easier in order to identify where a transaction originated from. But that's a lot more resource intensive than trying to use a public spy node. And when you actually look at a public spy node trying to identify a transaction's origin point, it's actually less successful, all the way up to 60% of the nodes being, or public nodes being spy nodes. There is a less success rate than the current transaction relay protocol. So I think overall that trade-off is well worth it, given the increasing robustness of the network. Having more connections to other nodes would allow, and just the overall savings this comes with. And also the Dandelion protocol, which is still something kind of being worked around to mitigate a mempool denial of service issue, would be compatible with this. So we would get a huge bandwidth savings. We would have the network become way more secure against partition attacks. And working Dandelion into this could actually counteract the extra vulnerability you would get to tracing transactions using private spy nodes. And so, like, overall, I think this is a huge development. And it's really, I mean, like, it's just awesome to see them finally get away from block relay efficiencies into transactions, because this is really how you bring down the cost for normal people just using their nodes to validate their own transactions. And as a side benefit, make those individual nodes more secure against things like Eclipse attacks that could try to trick them into accepting fraudulent states on the network. And so this is a pretty fucking awesome thing. And it's, you know, it really goes to show like how much of a difference you can make improving things that have nothing to do with the consensus layer.
So a quick background on Dandelion is that it works in a way that you are sending transaction to only one node, and that node sends to only one node and to only one node, and there is always a probability that you are starting to broadcast the transaction to two nodes instead of one node, and there is another probability that you are starting to broadcast the transaction to everyone. And this is why no one can identify where the transaction is coming from. This is Dandelion. Now, how it is working right now, how the Bitcoin peer-to-peer protocol working right now, how the Bitcoin transaction broadcasting protocol working right now, is that I send an inv request with that inv contains a hash, and if the node tells me, if the node replies me with the same inv hash, then I give him the transaction. Okay. If the node doesn't reply, then I don't. Now, I believe in the Dandelion protocol, this is not happening, because then the node would tell that who you are broadcasting to, then the node would expose that, hey, I already have the transaction. Now, if you try to batch these inv requests, inventory requests together, then you are exposing probably not more, but I don't see how it can be compatible with Dandelion. Did you look at it, Shinobi?
Well, yeah, it says when you look at Dandelion trying to work with the Relay protocol, it pretty much Relay would replace the stem phase. And so, like, you could kind of, or no, I'm sorry, never mind. Never mind. It would replace the fluff phase. So you would effectively kind of already get a replication of the stem phase with just only relaying things to certain nodes as far as individual transactions.
Yes.
So like,
so it's compatible in a way that this thing goes after the dandelion phases, right? That's the point. Okay.
Yeah, so it's
the other problem with dandelion. I don't know if it's a problem. It might be not. Is that it's it's obviously slower because there are more phases, and this makes it a little bit slower. I don't know. They probably did the calculation and they came to the conclusion, oh, this doesn't matter, but this might be an additional concern here too. Yeah. I mean that both dandelion makes it a bit slower and this batching makes it a bit slower. And I would actually ask the question, but they probably done the calculations again, that does the bandwidth matter really that much,
I mean, I absolutely, like, especially when you're looking at the like increase in bandwidth consumption to try to connect to more peers. And I mean, like, ultimately, like, we're literally talking about like it taking 5 seconds for a transaction to go across the whole network instead of like 1.3 seconds. Like the trade-off in that is so irrelevant that it's like I don't even think that's really worth like concerning yourself over. Like that's like looking at a screen for like the time it takes to read one tweet longer than you would have to see it actually propagate.
This is a bandwidth gain in expense of latency and privacy. Yeah.
Well, no, you would actually gain privacy for the most part because timing attacks against public nodes become way harder.
All right.
Heck yeah, man. That's where it's like these sort of developments, I mean, there's been a lot of work that we've talked a lot about with Lightning Network and Taproot and Graphroot and Mass and, all this sort of interesting stuff. And at the same time, there's still people bringing back up block size debates and all these sort of things about, what can make the network more efficient. And there's all these sort of little places where people coming into the space and they wonder, like, what can you get to work on? Well, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there and you can just sort of, start picking around and see if you could find that gain because, this will help big time, like you're saying, as far as just making the network more robust and, more private as well. I mean, that's a awesome gain as well. But I mean, I'm curious, like, how do you think you're saying this will increase the latency? Like, will this affect?
Yeah. Yes, for 3.5 to 5 seconds. That's what you said, right?
About 1.3 to 5 seconds. But I mean, that's like so irrelevant in terms of user experience, like that it doesn't matter.
Well, either way, yeah.
I wouldn't say so because I don't know if you're using Green Wallet on mobile, and because it's a great wallet. It just sometimes it takes like, let's say 5 or 10 seconds for the transaction to appear, and I'm always like, did I really send it or what's going on? It's maybe just matter of getting it.
I'm not too worried about it, but just to give another example, like if someone's loading a web page, if it hasn't fully loaded in like half a second, they're already having a heart attack and they're thinking of closing the article because it took too long to load. So if it has something to do with money, if it's not loaded by like a second or two, they're already going to be freaking out because that's just how people are.
Yeah, but I mean, like, think long term. Like, people are not going to be conducting commerce on the main chain. Like, all of that stuff is going to move completely off of it. So, I mean, like, it's like one thing you're trying to buy coffee at Starbucks and that happens, but it's if you're trying to move money from the equivalent of your savings account to your checking account, like, it takes 5 seconds. Like there's none of the like inconvenience at the store counter that comes in that.
Anyhow, this is something that developers has to make the trade-offs. It just, we don't have all the variables. I mean, you might have because you read properly the things, but I wouldn't just come out of against it just because I feel like it might be a worse trade-off than it might be a worse compromise. But yeah, I don't know. We have to look into it more deeply.
Well, I mean, like, think about it, Nopar. Like, people are going to be using things like Lightning or Chaumian servers or other things to actually buy shit with in 10 or 20 years. And you're talking about a like 40 to 75% drop in the cost to run a node as far as bandwidth, to have a slight latency increase in things that are on a layer that in 10 years people aren't going to be using directly to like buy things with or for retail use.
But if you are thinking long term, then one could make the argument that the bandwidth was never an issue, a bottleneck in transaction broadcasting. It's like
that's the thing. It's not just about the one transaction. It's about the cost of running the full node that validates things. And if we can get us like a 75, like pretty much the more nodes you connect to, the more of a bandwidth saving you're going to have. So that's already a huge gain to allow people to validate. And then if bandwidth, and then
it would be a huge incentive to make the network more interconnected.
And then as bandwidth gets better, that savings piles up even more and more to make the network even more interconnected. And so like that's a huge gain in terms of making it robust against any kind of partition attack.
All right, you start to convince me. Let's move on to the next topic. How about that?
All right. BCash shit show, everybody. So sure, everybody has dug into this a bit already, but on May 15th, BCash went through a hard fork that kind of had a couple of different interrelated issues going on. So first off, the fork happened and almost all of the blocks on the hard fork side for I think something like 10 or 15 blocks were completely empty blocks. And the pre-hard fork side actually had a block come in after the hard fork. And so like this is complete speculation, but some miners were either slow to upgrade or maybe one freaked out about the empty block issue and then switched back to the pre-hard fork client temporarily, thinking that everybody would follow. But the issue with the empty blocks was effectively that the validation strictness for a transaction getting into the mempool was actually looser than the consensus rules for a block to be valid. So effectively what happened is people broadcast transactions to the network that got into the node's mempool that would make a block invalid. And so as a response to this, all of the miners pretty much started mining empty blocks because there was no way to instantly, just pull software out of your ass to check the entire mempool and see which transactions would make your block invalid if you included them. And so this is a huge, huge design flaw and pretty much the exact opposite of how Bitcoin works, where the mempool validation rules are actually stricter than what is allowed by consensus in a block. So like there are actually a number of different kinds of transactions that you can make on Bitcoin that would be valid if they were included in a block, but you would actually have to directly give to a miner to include, because nodes on the network are not going to accept them in their mempool and broadcast them. It's pretty much like the policy rules as far as, you know, whether a node is going to relay something. And that's very important, because having things structured that way prevents things like this, where a miner goes to include something that was in their mempool but makes their block invalid. And so somebody pretty much, I think, was likely sitting on this bug and exploited it during the chain split to cause a little bit of chaos. Now, as far as the block that came in on the pre hard fork side, this actually has some pretty interesting issues in and of itself that BitMEX research identified, just really tinkering with things. So what they did was effectively went to their post hard fork node and invalidated all of the blocks after the hard fork, and then sent that node the block from the pre-hard fork side. And it actually accepted the block as valid. So this hard fork was totally asymmetric and not properly engineered, because it accepted a block that followed the pre-hard fork rules as a valid block after the hard fork. So that also is something that could have caused a lot of issues had hash rate flipped around in the other direction in terms of which chain the majority was mining. And now the last issue, I think, is the funniest here. In the last hard fork, BCash actually made all outputs accidentally sent to Segwit addresses unspendable. And in this hard fork, they undid that to allow miners to recover these lost coins and get them back to the people who got them stuck. And so somebody, in the chaos of exploiting the bug to invalidate blocks that led to miners mining empty blocks, swept all of these unlocked Segwit outputs. And so the rest of the miners reorganized the chain by 2 blocks to take all of these transactions back. So they effectively double spent. And the hilarious thing here is that Bitcoin.com is pretty much trying to argue that this is not a 51% attack, because we just took back coins that were stolen from somebody. And this is a huge slippery slope as far as arguing when something isn't an attack on the network. And round of applause. The article arguing this was actually written by Jamie Redmond, one of the biggest lunatics working for Bitcoin.com, next to David Shares. And it's just the type of rationalization here. It just shows the complete and utter lack of any kind of principles or integrity in the BCash side of things at this point. Like, they've instituted centralized checkpointing. They are now rationalizing that 51% reorg attacks are okay as long as this group of people thinks it's fine because we're just taking back something that was stolen. Like, they have pretty much just taken every quality of Bitcoin that actually makes it valuable and just thrown it in the trash at this point, just constantly screaming, no, we're the real Bitcoin. We're the real Bitcoin. While they've just undermined everything Bitcoin is supposed to do in terms of functionality. So, I mean, like this incident, it shows just complete incompetence and a complete lack of integrity on every level possible.
Yeah, man, this was a comical thing that was happening that I wish we could have reported on as it was happening, because it was one of these, like you're saying, it was just funny. Somebody's taking advantage of, you know, this fork and how exactly that was going to go about. And yeah, you know, these guys over there, there's not many people there, and their views definitely are conflicting with what the ethos of Bitcoin is trying to achieve. And yeah, it just kind of goes to show that anybody that's still buying up that narrative, where are you at, Truth Monster? Are you in the chat? Like, you guys, man, look at what they're saying. Like, oh yeah, we just took the money back, and you know, it's not a 51% attack. And I mean, come on, you guys are yelling about how this is all peer-to-peer electronic cash. Like, tell me how you can have a cash transaction like that. It just doesn't work. I mean, so, you know, you're running away from your own narrative on all these things. And, you know, I don't know how much longer that whole, you know, we're Bitcoin, because, I mean, I guess it could play out for a while as people are still learning, but it's really getting ridiculous. I mean, it's kind of becoming the butt of the joke as far as people saying, like, you know, don't trust the @Bitcoin account or the bitcoin.com. There's still a lot of people out there being fooled whenever their initial, you know, search through things. But I think for the most part, people that have been sitting around since the all-time high can kind of recognize that, you know, this is a, yeah, it's a BCash shit show over there.
So just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, what's your limit there? So let's say, can we agree on that if let's say someone breaks the hashing, every cryptographic technique that Bitcoin is using, and steals all the money, that's something that we fix with a forced hard fork. It's I think we can agree on that, right?
But you can't. Like, that's not something you can fix with a hard fork like that, because if the crypto is broken, then whoever broke the crypto just always has the ability to spend those coins. Like, there's no way to make sure that the legitimate owner can only, or is the only one who can access those. Like, if that happens, like, you can't fix that.
Arguably, the mining space were much more decentralized in 2013, and we succeeded to do a huge reorg then for Mykern's bug. That's quite similar. So I would argue that you can, if it's so uncontroversial.
But it's again though, like that reorg had nothing to do with taking coins back. That was just resolving a chain split. Like that was not done to take coins from somebody and give them back to somebody else. Like, that has never happened in the history of Bitcoin.
Sure, but you know, when someone tells a woman that, would you have sex with me for $1 million, and she would say yes, and then you would ask that, how about $10, and she would say no, I'm not you know, but I'm going for, there is a limit. That, so what would you be your limit, that how much you would accept, you know?
Nothing. Like, if coins get sent somewhere and that gets piled on top of, it's done. Like, if something like this happens on Bitcoin, then Bitcoin it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think it completely violates the value proposition of what Bitcoin's doing. I mean, my whole argument there really was like, they're playing this peer-to-peer cash game where Bitcoin kind of recognizes it's something different, and that there's settlement layers of mechanisms where there's also, you know, these things built on top of that are trying to play that role. And they are saying that that base layer is the cash. And I'm just saying that there's no way you would have a cash transaction in real life that would behave that way. All right, so I guess are we done tearing into Roger? Janine, did you want to say something about this whole situation? All right, I'll take that as a yeah. Figured that's what was the case. So let's just go into this. Well, all right, just about a week ago, Circle put out a blog post expressing their deep frustration with the current regulatory environment within the United States. They talk about signals they've seen recently from regulators that make them feel uncertain about how to move forward with business in the United States. Before we get into the conflicting regulatory requirements, let's hear their stance on how regulators should approach the space. This is from their blog post, quote, "The heart of our argument for a clear, forward-looking regulatory framework for crypto has long been that digital assets represent a fundamentally new class of financial instruments which defy simple classifications as security, commodity, or currency," close quote. They make cracks about the SEC porting over the Howey test from traditional markets, saying the laws were written in the 20th century and we need something written for the 21st. And laws are struggling to keep up with the innovation. Since the legalities for our space are not set in stone and we have to reinterpret old laws while new ones are written, Circle has kept a close eye on every signal sent out by the SEC. These signals come in the form of speeches, enforcement actions, and analysis about which digital assets are labeled securities. One of their key sources for guidance until recently was the speech from William Hinman in June of 2018, where he said, quote, "If the network on which the token or coin is to function is sufficiently decentralized, where purchasers would no longer reasonably expect a person or group to carry out essential managerial or entrepreneurial efforts, the assets may not represent an investment contract," close quote. I'm sure most of you guys remember that the crypto side of the community was elated to hear this news of sufficiently decentralized, and everyone ran about their business thinking the old rules don't apply to them. Circle says that elation is gone, and now the regulatory environment has shifted with the release of the SEC's ICO framework last month. Here are Circle's bullet points about the framework that gave them so much confusion. 1, the framework undercuts the idea earlier expressed by Hinman that sufficient decentralization could show that a digital asset isn't a security. 2, the framework introduces the concept that a secondary market in a digital asset, i.e., that it's available on an exchange like Poloniex, might indicate that it's a security. 3, the framework assumes that the first 2 prongs of the Supreme Court's Howey's test, which could help to show that a digital asset is not a security, always applies to digital assets. And finally, the framework provides a broader pathway for the SEC to take enforcement action. So they break down the issues with each of these bullet points in their blog post, but in the interest of time, let's stick to the topic of Hinman's speech. Circle says that the introduction of active participants, or AP, undercuts the importance of decentralization by suggesting the SEC will consider a whole new host of network participants in the analysis. Here's a quote from the SEC's guidance. Quote, "When a promoter, sponsor, or other third party or affiliated group of third parties, each an active participant or AP, provides essential managerial efforts that affect the success of those enterprises and investors reasonably expect to derive profit from those efforts, then this prong of the test is met," close quote. When Circle puts the network striving for which Circle says puts network striving for decentralization in a catch-22. They say because this definition includes affiliated groups of third parties, it could be read to wrap in groups such as mining pools, validators, developers, repository maintainers, and other structures that the community previously considered to be indicative of decentralization. All of this recent shifting in thought on the way the U.S. regulators are approaching the space had Circle's exchange Poloniex geofence U.S. investors from certain assets. An announcement from a couple of weeks ago said that U.S. investors will no longer have access to the following markets: ARDR, BCN, DCR, GAME, GAS, LISC, Next, NXT, Omni, and REP. They removed these assets specifically because, quote, "It is not possible to be certain whether U.S. regulators will consider these assets to be securities," close quote. So there is some more in-depth information about how they see the regulatory environment changing in the blog post, but that about covers their stance with regulators. I would say I agree that conflicting signals from regulators at the SEC has been the rocking waves of the crypto ocean, and it's foggy out there. it's hard to tell if there's a rogue wave out there that might just flood the decks of these networks and down they go. I will say I'm not going to miss any sleep at night because I don't have access to Lisk on Polo. But what do you guys think about all this and the shifting sands of regulatory clarity with the SEC?
Well, I mean, I've said this quite a few times. I really don't think there should be any barriers to doing things like ICOs as long as you actually have something in terms of a product or service. Like my problem with ICOs is people just raising millions or billions of dollars when they literally haven't even started building anything yet. But that's a clear scam. But when you actually have something, like there shouldn't be rules stopping you from raising money to actually deploy it or do something with it. And it's ridiculous. I mean, like, as far as Poloniex spazzing out and, delisting a bunch of shit, well, like, you guys should have been prepared for that. Like, when they got bought out by Circle, like, it's like, dude, that's literally like shitcoin central. That's where people went to pump and dump. Like, there were literally people who would talk in the troll box on the exchange about what they're pumping and dumping. Like, for them to not have seen this coming, like, did you even pay attention to what the hell you bought?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I don't know. Like, I'm not really that worried about some of these assets that they're taking down. I mean, we're just in this for Bitcoin, but I'm in agreement with you. I don't think there should be really any barriers for people that are actually putting stuff together that has like a real use case and something that could provide an efficiency that I'm not seeing. But, as far as like just the way that the SEC has been, I mean, like, we've seen them say time and time again of some of the things that they need or want for an ETF, and feel like all that stuff's sort of been, those check boxes have been checked and they still kind of go the opposite direction. But then, yeah, there's also this back and forth about what exactly is going to be a security whenever they had that sufficiently decentralized quote from last year, like I was saying. And, if this undercuts that, then it would be a big back and forth in pretty much a couple of the biggest years in crypto.
Mm-hmm. And like, specifically like them delisting Omni, like that used to be known as Mastercoin. Like that's like, I think that like that's them freaking out a little too much, and I think shows like how stupidly unprepared they were for this kind of reaction, because Mastercoin was done with proof of burn. Like nobody raised money for that. People just burned Bitcoin and turned them into Mastercoin. So like there was no raise of money in the creation of that token. So like that's just kind of like, do you know the first thing about what you're looking at here in terms of assets?
Omni was actually, I don't know if it was the precursor to Tether, but it was the same thing that one of the developers for Tether was working on.
Yeah, it's the protocol Tether's issued on. It's yeah. It's pretty much just like Counterparty. Like Omni and Counterparty are just like two different versions of like the same thing to issue tokens on top of Bitcoin.
Which that would not surprise me if the reason why they're putting Omni in there is just because of its relation to Tether. But yeah, I mean, I wish that this stuff could just keep going and we could figure out, let the market decide. But it's just too easy to spin up these networks, and there's too much market confusion to where I wish that the SEC could have a clear stance. But it does sound like they're just a bunch. I mean, I guess a few guys in a basement of some, government building, because it does seem like there's really no communication outside of these speeches and enforcement actions and stuff like that. But yeah, we're starting to drag on into time and everything. So where are we going next with these stories?
Janine, over to you.
Oh, yeah.
Well, on a related note to the story that Rick just covered, Fred Wilson, the co-founder of Union Square Ventures, who is crypto famous for being a Coinbase fanboy and arguing that Ethereum needs to be more centralized, he tweeted yesterday, quote, "It is my hope that Defend Crypto will be an inspiration for the many other important crypto projects that are silently battling with the SEC to come public and raise capital from the crypto sector to fund these efforts." So basically a fundraising effort that is supported by Circle, something called Kin, Shapeshift, Masari, Arlington XRP Capital, and Fight for the Future, which is disappointing, has recently been launched because some ICO project that I have once again never heard of is in trouble with the SEC and they want to fight it. And their website, which is defendcrypto.org, claims to have already raised $5.3 million worth of donations, most of which was in Ether, Bitcoin, and almost $1 million in some kind of Kin token. So their website provides a timeline, which of course I had to read because I literally did not know anything about this project until today. But apparently the Kin token sale occurred way back in September 2017. And in the same month, they received an inquiry from the SEC because, surprise, surprise, they think that Kin is a security. And so they claim now, despite the fact that last month over 300,000 people earned and spent Kin as a currency, the SEC is still saying that it might be a security. After months of trying to find a reasonable solution, Kin has been unable to reach a settlement that wouldn't severely impact the Kin project and everyone in the space. So Kin is going to take on the SEC in court to make sure there is a foundation for innovation going forward. Wow, so 300,000 people, that's 300,000 divided by 30 days, gives you an average of 10,000 daily active users. Isn't it amazing that this no-name ICO project managed to surpass the daily active user count for Ethereum dApps, which have been around for a few years now, and have the marketing power of consensus behind it? One does wonder how they reach those numbers. Unsurprisingly, they're hosting the fundraiser on Coinbase, and I say unsurprising because Fred Wilson and Brian Armstrong talked on stage at Consensus 2019, and I got the impression that Fred Wilson was praising Coinbase so much that I was almost expecting him to get on one knee and propose to Brian Armstrong. So will someone please think of the VCs? In the words of John Carvalho, quote, "The powerless, oppressed, largest VC firms in the world want to be able to reap the savings of ignorant, greedy speculators while offering unregulated, sentimental securities with no user rights in peace. Someone please help these poor guys." Roll eyes emoji, puke emoji. And that is all.
I think Rad Vladdy has the right idea in the chat here. Where do we donate to the SEC for their prosecution fund?
Well, I don't know if that's available.
You don't donate, they take it.
I can see it now. Crypto Daddy opening support. Oh wait, he's the CFTC. Oops, wrong person. Anyway, if there's a Crypto Daddy at the SEC, I'm sure you will get money out of this.
I just think this is hysterical and kind of like I was saying in the earlier story, that this seems to be their stand, where it's like, okay, if they are going to start sweeping in with these different regulations and this enforcement action that's kind of separate to what sufficiently decentralized means, and they are going to start taking on these networks, then Kin is the one that they're going to take their stand on, because it's like Circle's invested in their defense, so Shapeshift, Arlington XRP Capital, and that news outlet Masari that's also closely linked with Coinbase, and they raised the 5-point-something million, and then I think they're saying they're setting aside another 5 million for this defense. And as far as like any project that's actually trying to push back on some of the SEC's recent enforcement stuff, this seems to be the most, it's got the most headlines, the most highlights, and the most funding to back it up. And I just think it is kind of ridiculous, because Kik was just a stupid messenger app that a bunch of kids used. I mean, as far as I remember, I thought it was kind of like said that Kik got shut down for a little bit because it was like kids were hooking up and with older guys and stuff like that on that messenger platform. Like it was not a good messenger platform. And then, yeah, the kin token and the active users and all that stuff. I mean, this could be their fight to see where the SEC stands on sufficiently decentralized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a joke.
So yeah, I'm really curious to know where they got those numbers from, if it's actually true what Rick said, that they're a bunch of kids. Well, I think that might make the SEC even more angry, because kids investing in a token is an even more legal gray area. But good luck with that. In fact, I will use this pun: kick them in the ass.
You're so right, man.
But
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, as everyone should know by now, I'm not at all a fan of government regulation, but I am of the opinion that if a letter from the SEC is a threat to your entire crypto token, whatever, then you're doing something wrong and I don't care about you.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody goes back and says, like, the SEC, they just like have a regulator just look into like who was Kick's main active users whenever they did the token sale, I think that in itself is going to be pretty damning.
I swear, Your Honor, we did not know the ages of the kids who were buying our tokens.
Who in the chat? I gotta get it. Vogue Blackheart, good one. Kids coins, that's it. Yeah, the Kick kids coins.
Kids on the street, kids on the beat, beat kids.
All right, man. Why don't you take us into something troubling going on down in Maryland? Down in, more like up in, right?
Yeah, so I think about 3 weeks ago now, Baltimore got hit with a relatively new variant of ransomware. What was it called? Robinhood. And it pretty much burned through their systems and locked down the voicemail systems, email systems, their database for parking fines, water bill payments, property taxes, and vehicle citations, so like speeding tickets and things. And it actually also locked down a system used for house sales, which jammed up around 1,500 homes for sale. That took them until this week to actually put together an offline system to allow these sales to keep moving forward. And this is absolutely not even close to the first time that a municipal system like this has been hit by ransomware. And it's really getting to the point. It's kind of absurd, where you're looking at like 13 bitcoins, so like $100,000, is holding an entire city's infrastructure ransom. And as of right now, there really hasn't been any kind of evidence or information to show who actually pulled this off. But I think the most interesting thing about this is actually the exploit that was used to pull this off was from the shadow brokers' leaked NSA toolkits. A exploit called Eternal Blue against Microsoft systems. And a number of different people, from the mayor to the Baltimore senator whose district, the Maryland senator whose district Baltimore falls into, are effectively screaming for a briefing from the NSA and demanding federal money now in order to deal with the damages caused by this attack. Some people even going so far as to demand this be declared a emergency to unlock even more federal funds to deal with the issue. And the real cherry on the top for these government officials running to the federal government on this is that the Eternal Blue exploit has had a patch from Microsoft for over 2 years now, and none of these cities' systems were patched for this. So you effectively have them running to the NSA and the federal government trying to blame them and put them on the hook for monetary losses, when it really comes down to it, it's the city's IT staff being 2 years behind in security patches that made this specific infection through this exploit possible in the first place. And like this is going to, I think, steamroll into a big shit show, not only just over the money, but I think this is going to lead to a lot more pressure on the NSA than they've received since the shadow brokers tools were released, as far as like what their culpability or their liability is for these tools floating around and when they're actually used on American targets. But as far as the ransomware side of things go itself, this is not the first time, and this is definitely not going to be the last time that we see a story like this, to just show how completely inept and powerless against digital threats that modern day bureaucracies are.
Yeah, certainly not going to be the last. And I mean, for me, like, as bad as it is, and someplace like Baltimore that's already going through numerous amounts of troubles with the way to manage society, and those systems become compromised and grind to a halt from ransomware. I mean, it is going to make them and other cities to take pause and look at their digital infrastructure and the way that they provide security for that infrastructure. And it's bad, but like you're saying, this is not going to be the last, and these other places better wise up to actually spending some of their budget on upgrading their infrastructure. I mean, me and you have talked about, some of these places that are, the next Silicon Valley, or, just a place that's supposed to be where there's, a big, robust infrastructure built out, that you can't even get a good signal. And it's just like nobody takes these points of the infrastructure seriously. And this is the sort of thing that might actually get them to start paying attention to that. And that's where it's like, if there's a gray lining on this, it's hopefully everybody's going to look at this and say, well, we better go ahead and prepare for this. If not upgrade the infrastructure, then we'll stockpile some Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, sorry, Gene, go ahead.
I actually remember in the first episode of The Wire, wasn't there a joke about how some of the people in the police department didn't know how to use computers or something, or their computers were out of date?
Oh yeah, that's a running gag through the whole show. Like they would constantly have to go to the FBI for like wiretap equipment, because what the police had was like literally like a tape recorder that people were supposed to stuff in their pants with a microphone.
It's so funny because the mainstream cop shows like CSI and stuff, they always make the computer part of the police detective team like so competent. They got like holographic screens and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you guys finish the discussion on this?
No.
I just wanted to point out that the first link that you added is, unfortunately, our website is currently unavailable in most European countries. What can Assemble do? What can you do when this happens? So go on Tor.
Archive it. Or and just archive it.
They ask, what's the point of Tor? Well, this is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, get around all these damn paywalls. Come on.
It's a paywall. It's not a paywall. It's blocked at least in my country, but it says in most European countries, so you just cannot see that article.
Yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of like city newspapers, where I'll go to their website and I usually don't read stuff from them because it's a city newspaper and I don't live in that city, but it'll be like something international and they've written a story about it, and I go to it and it's like, oh, random Los Angeles newspaper, sorry, we do not allow European readers. I'm like, really? How many European readers do you get that you need to block us?
Jeez, man, they're just trying to control the flow of information to such a level to where, yeah, it's just, they don't want you crazy people from outside the United States just budging with our elections or something.
Well, no, I mean, the real reason is GDPR, and they don't have enough money to make themselves compliant with that. So they're just like, yeah, let's just block an entire continent.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. That's why I said paywall, because even living in the country, if you try to go to a local newspaper, you're going to get hit with a paywall, and their subscription services are outrageous, and it still costs an arm and a leg.
Yeah, but the funniest part is that most of them, all you have to do is like click view source, and then you can read it.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about something else going on in a different country. So we've discussed how LocalBitcoins was moving to implement KYC AML measures to abide by the FATF guidelines, which is upsetting but somewhat understandable. Well, now LocalBitcoins has made a move that has other businesses jumping in to take their lunch. Just last week, CoinDesk reported on the Helsinki-based exchange suddenly cutting off access to Iranian users. They rightfully speculated that recent increased tensions between the US and Iran with added sanctions was most likely the cause. There was no announcement that this was coming. Shortly after LocalBitcoins made this move, the news spread across local Telegram channels. One user did get a response from the company saying, quote, "Unfortunately, our service is no longer available in your country. If you have an account, you will be able to withdraw your Bitcoins, but you will not be able to use the platform for trading. We apologize for the inconvenience," close quote. They went a little further with a response on Twitter saying, "Our services are not available in your region for risk-based reasons," close quote. Yeah, I would imagine that risk being the US reaching their extended arm into Finland to rough up the company if they continue to serve Iran. Well, fortunately, there are other companies out there willing to take on that risk. HodlHodl put out a blog post saying they are happy to embrace the Iranian community to trade at their exchange. They say they're committed to global expansion, and Iran is no exception. The exchange has been translating everything over to Farsi and is now almost fully translated. Everyone who registers till mid-June with the referral code Iran receives a permanent discount of 0.05% on exchange fees. And then lastly, they are creating a private Telegram channel for all Iranian users to communicate. And all of this feels like perfect timing for HodlHodl and anyone else wanting to play market politics. But it should be said, they aren't the only ones to move into the area. BISC has already made that move to encourage Iranian traders to use their platform with Farsi translations. And then there's another called Keep Change. In the CoinDesk article, they interviewed Zaya, who said these alternatives to LocalBitcoins have already proven to be better and are attracting Iranian users. So while it's upsetting to see LocalBitcoins kowtow to KYC and now U.S. sanctions in Iran, it's good to know there are other options out there marketing to these individuals and that it's already providing some good efficiency gains. But yeah, that's what's going on over there in Iran. I know we haven't really brought up much since they were seizing a few miners at the border because of certain contracts being signed for wrong geographic locations. But yeah, it looks like these increased Iran sanctions that was just recently put in by Trump has now got companies in Finland to say, well, we don't want to touch you. Like we're done. So, but luckily there's these other companies. Yeah. But what do you guys think about this?
So two things. Oh, go ahead.
I've been talking about this effect quite a while now. That what if they ban Bitcoin? What if they not completely, but they kind of ban Bitcoin in many places? Then we would gravitate towards the better, more philosophically better services in a way that you're not holding the money and it's more decentralized, right? So now Iranians has the options to try out the well, might be a bit more buggier, but in the end, more in better services, and they are, by using those services, they are supporting those services. So I think it's quite interesting, and I think Iran doesn't really lose too much in terms of, well, at least they are not gonna be that know your customer that like Coinbase would move to Iran, right? Like, well, then every Bitcoin user there, or most of them, would be on the list of Bitcoin users. But this
Oh
way
God.
they won't be.
Coinbase would never move to Iran, ever.
Yeah, so they don't have to trade of convenience.
Yeah, so two things. I mean, first of all, they haven't like, I don't think they've flat out banned Bitcoin, but I think many episodes ago I talked about how people thought they had removed the ban on Bitcoin, but actually they only allowed, certain mining companies to operate, but they were all state owned or state influenced. But I think there is still a ban on normal citizens owning cryptocurrency. So it's effectively, they haven't banned Bitcoin, they've banned the ownership of cryptocurrency, but obviously it's not working because there are Iranian cryptocurrency users. So yeah, the one thing I would say, or that I was thinking about, is I find it hilarious in HodlHodl's case that they're doing this, because like it's a weird situation. They don't allow US users to use their platform, but they're like inviting Iranian users to. It's like a very weird, it's like the opposite of what every other exchange, every custodial exchange is trying to do. I just think it's a funny situation.
It kind of makes sense, though. I mean, the most of the trouble that you can get into in any business happens when you are serving US customers, but the US market is so huge that no one really wants to go down on that road.
Yeah, like Circle was saying, they're having a hard time serving U.S. customers.
Also, I don't know if it's something you said or if it was a quote you were reading, but the part where you said that this was based on recent tensions between the US and Iran, I was thinking, what? There's been like 50 to 60 years at least of tensions that have been building up to this point. Like I was reading some cables the other day in the Plus D release, and it was specifically about like Swiss diplomats, or no, US diplomats in Switzerland. And one of the topics they kept focusing on was Swiss companies possibly being involved with Iran, or being involved with companies in Iran. And so the US has been basically trying to isolate Iran for a very long time. So none of this really surprises me. Of course, Trump is kind of the president that he's willing to go to all of the, danger zones where previous presidents really wish they would have been able to go to, but somehow they were convinced not to, and he doesn't care, and he's willing to, prosecute publishers under the Espionage Act and institute sanctions that are very controversial and blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah, in my notes, I have recent increased tensions. I don't know if I said that, though. Yeah, it's recent increased tensions. It's like, there's always been tensions for sure, but recently they've increased. I mean, I know that Trump did add some new sanctions just recently, but that's all about, I really know. But there is a really interesting sort of feedback loop here, like you guys were talking about, where it's like, because Iran is in this trouble, you have more, philosophical avenues and ethical companies coming in, which will drive the development of those platforms into a better direction than they're at now, and giving the Iranian people basically a better avenue for people to actually enter the Bitcoin system, where whenever you have countries like the United States, it's like everything's kind of getting locked down into this paradigm of, yeah, you can get Bitcoin, but only if we know who you are and where you're at. And you file your taxes appropriately, and all this stuff that you have to abide by. And yeah, I mean, it kind of just drives some of these places that have been Well, I mean, Iran really hasn't. I mean, if you look in there, it's kind of westernized. It's pretty westernized. It's not really under like a dictatorship, like I imagine the mainstream would say. I mean, I imagine the Iranian people would say that they live a fairly free life, but it just definitely runs counter, and it'll give them an advantage in the long run. But for sure, right now, it's it's kind of tight because all these platforms that are moving in there are still relatively new, but like Zaya was saying, so far it's performing better than local Bitcoins. So that's already an improvement, and it should just keep getting better. All right, Janine, you want to tell us what's going on with Cryptopia? I know that we talked about they were getting liquidated last time we talked about it.
Yeah, so that was 2 episodes ago in episode 176, where I talked about how Cryptopia, the exchange based in New Zealand, was entering the liquidation process after a hack in January really impacted their business. And 2 days ago, on May 27th, the firm Grant Thornton International, that they're now working with as part of that, published an update to say that they had filed a petition in the bankruptcy court for the Southern District of New York, quote, seeking recognition of the New Zealand liquidation in the USA in order to preserve the Cryptopia information that is stored and hosted on servers with an Arizona-based business. And they include a link to the order granting an emergency motion for provisional relief under that update post, which apparently they were asking for relief until June 7th. And there was actually an additional development in the story that came out prior to this request. On May 23rd, it was reported by Bitcoin Magazine that the founder of Cryptopia, Adam Clark, some reason amid all of this chaos, had decided that it was a good time to launch a new exchange. Even weirder, he appears to have been working on it since at least September 2018. That's not super suspicious whatsoever. And he's already claiming that it is, quote, New Zealand's most advanced cryptocurrency exchange. So good luck with that, buddy.
Yeah, it seems kind of crazy to me that they would plead to the United States that for somehow the U.S. was going to protect that user data. I mean, like, I guess they did, like you're saying, until June 7th. But, I mean, it seems kind of crazy to do that. But I guess, they're trying to make every move they can. For sure, the founder building an exchange kind of reminds me of that CTO of Tron being like, I'm going to build that new Tron. And it's just like, that seems to be, it's like a Dan Lambert move.
Yeah, and apparently it's not very active, but I wouldn't be surprised if, there's something more sinister going on with that. But yeah, so the relief that they asked for, the reason is because their hosting provider or whoever is, I don't know if it's their only copy or an important copy, but they have an SQL database hosted somewhere in Arizona, and so they wanted to make sure that that data would be protected because it has copies or something of all of the account information. I don't know if it's for every customer or just US customers, but that's what they were asking for.
Well, yeah, all you people thinking about signing over to this new exchange, just look at the shoddy bad practices they had set up for the old one.
Yeah, and it's because I was a bit confused with the way the article was written, but there was a Bitcoin Magazine article that summarized this, and apparently the reason they wanted to do it is because the company in Arizona that is holding this database was apparently demanding like $200 million or something. Like they didn't want to be a part of the liquidation process, and so that's why they said, "Hey, US, can you please make sure this company who is very angry at us doesn't hurt our business or something."
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of money, but it's some important data. All right, let's I hope you're ready for the next one, Shinobi, because this one is going to take just a half a second. All right, guys. So that Yahoo-based Japanese exchange we've talked about, TaoTao, it's going live at noon on May 30th, Japanese Standard Time. And that is all. TaoTao going live noon, May 30th.
Ah.
What is TaoTao?
It's Yahoo's exchange.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
Da-na-na, da-na-na. All right. So next up, get ready for Angry Shinobi. Tippin'
Well,
change.
I'm always ready because I didn't know there was anything else other than Angry Shinobi.
All right. Tiffany has just launched version 1.0 of their application, their browser plugin. And yep, they're doing the exact opposite of what they should be doing and moving in a direction of having access to even more user information. So now they have enabled tipping out of your Tiffany balance. So now instead of having to actually have a Lightning wallet and pay an invoice, which has some degree of anonymity, now you can just directly transfer balance from your account tied to your own Twitter account to somebody else's account tied to their Twitter account. So that Tiffany now knows exactly who is sending how much to who and maintains a record of this. After that, you can now leave notes, whether you're using a Lightning invoice or tipping out of your balance. So now, Tip and Me is going to have, yep, you guessed it, private communications between people who they already have financial information on. And the last awesome part here is they're going to be supporting on-chain Bitcoin deposits and withdrawals now. So now, instead of having some degree of plausible like firewalling between all of your money outside Tip and Me by pulling out through the Lightning Network and sending in through the Lightning Network, they're going to be able to take your deposits and withdrawals and track them on the blockchain if you make any withdrawal or deposit through on-chain transactions. So what's the last part here? Yes, as we've been over before the last time I went through all of my issues with this service, how are they making money? Because there's no way you're even paying costs for the server to run this shit from the types of fractional fees that you can charge off of this. Well, that's an even more relevant question now because they're giving away 1,000 Satoshis to new users for a limited time, as well as 500 Satoshis if you get somebody to sign up with a referral link connecting to your Twitter account. So now, yep, that's right, even more information tying together your money with your accounts. So let's give a round of applause for Tip and Me for turning into the exact same kind of privacy raping data mining that ChangeTip was. And I want to reiterate before I end this rant that, again, I have no problems with custodial things. My issue is custodial things that do not engineer themselves to protect your privacy as much as possible. So let's give a round of applause to Tip and Me being yet another one of these custodial products that doesn't think the slightest bit about how to preserve your privacy and just rakes in as much personal information as they possibly can in providing their service.
Yay.
Yeah. Yikes. So yeah, just thinking real quickly, like, yeah, I mean, like Tip and Me, I mean, you know, all this Lightning development, you know, it's tedious and time consuming, and a lot of, you know, your mind has to be in Lightning, and like to go and you're gonna develop the base layer functionality for that as well. That seems like a wrong move. I mean, you know, I know some Lightning developers here, and just talking to them about base layer consensus, they're like, wait a minute, what? You know, like they're on this other level and they need to be there to, you know, keep developing on that layer. And it just, that seems like a wrong move. And definitely the aspects as far as like these things not helping, because I mean, going from Lightning to base layer, that's definitely going to be bad for privacy. It's just, it sounds like a way to just try and keep the numbers up as far as like, what the wallet was released a while back now, and it's gotten a lot of praise, and, I see people using it on Twitter on a regular basis, and, but that's been going on for a while now. I imagine that their volume of active users just kind of topped out a little bit to where they're saying like, how do we get more active users? Well, let's just start adding base layer functionality and all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, you're taking your mind completely off the ball. But I don't know. That's just my opinion on it.
It's just like, it really pisses me off, because like he's a custodial. The person doing this is a custodial business. They're violating all kinds of laws and regulations. They're taking that risk. So why not? Because you're already taking that risk. Build something based on blind signatures. Build a Chaumian server. You're obviously willing to take the risk of doing some custodial product and not care about the regulations and laws you're breaking. So do it properly and actually preserve your users' privacy. The tool to do that, the design to do that, is literally 30 fucking years old. If you're going to do something, do it right.
All right, man. Yeah, I know that that gets you upset. So where are we going next here? It looks like we're talking about Watchtowers, some functionality. Let's change Angry Shinobi. This is a better Shinobi, right?
No.
Oh no.
Do it fucking right. All right. So 17 hours ago, a pull request for LND is in with pretty much most of the Watchtower functionality finished. So it will be able to run LND with a Watchtower directly hooked up to it. Although, one thing to point out here is there is no financial incentivization for the Watchtower out of the penalty transaction for something yet. There's still outstanding issues to do that safely. But besides that, I mean, this is pretty much good to go. You can run it or connect to a remote Watchtower, use it to back up information, although they are recommending not using remote Watchtowers or listening for remote connections with yours yet. There are still some potential changes before this is actually a final merge. But if you want to actually kind of just roll this up and compile it yourself right now, you are technically able to run a functioning Watchtower without a financial incentive there. And I think this is going to be pretty exciting going forward. People can actually roll this out now and will, first of all, see whether this actually works without a financial incentive, and actually start tinkering around with, different ways to incentivize the Watchtower. Because, ultimately being on a second layer like this, like there is no one way to do this. Like LND is looking towards incentivizing them by paying the Watchtower out of a penalty transaction. Right now, it can function just on blindly trusting it. Like I personally wouldn't use this next one, but you could have a Watchtower where you pay a regular fee or something. Like this is an area where there's going to be lots of room to experiment with different incentive models and different structures. And it's going to be nice to actually, have this finalized and out there soon, because this is really the step we need to take in order to see how actual light clients function on the Lightning Network. because, you know, right now the only mobile wallet or mobile wallets I'm aware of that actually allow receiving either work based on blindly trusting the wallet provider to do something, or in the case of Eclair, they have a 2-week timeout so that you can actually, you know, just check in periodically and make sure things are okay. But that's a huge inconvenience to the other side of the channel, because if they need to non-cooperatively close, they have to wait 2 weeks as opposed to the 1 day you have to wait if you non-cooperatively close. And so this, you know, we can actually start getting rid of that timeout asymmetry and really seeing, you know, the efficiency and the user experience of light wallets really get ironed out, and see how smooth we can make that. So, you know, good job, fucking L&D team. Fuck you tipping me.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, it'll be good to get these watchtowers in place, because I know that a lot of people talk about liquidity issues and all this stuff, and, you know, it'll be good to have that sort of thing handled to where people can more easily develop stuff like those Lightning wallets.
I don't think you have to worry about the payouts that, there is no incentive to run watchtowers. Of course there are. Blockchain or these companies has millions of incentives to run these watchtowers.
Yeah, banks too, right?
Yeah, banks too.
Well, I mean, it's my point with that, Nopara, is that like there's no one way you have to do a watchtower. I mean, like I would run one and not like have any kind of reward for me catching something if it doesn't take too many resources. Just plug it in and leave it on, and like I don't really care. I'll leave it on there to help things, but some people might want that extra guarantee that somebody's going to be making money by safeguarding my channel, and not want to just trust that there's people out there like me who are okay with just plugging it in and not worrying about making money off of it.
All right. So, yeah, sounds interesting, man. Was there any more comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, sure, it's nice. It's a great usability improvement, and then mobile clients get used to it. But it's just a privacy leak. I don't know. Maybe it's just my thing. Never mind. Let's go to yes.
You can structure watchtowers so that they don't leak any kind of privacy unless like something actually gets penalized. Like if I remember right, I think it just looks for the output hash in a transaction so that they won't be able to tell like which coins on chain those connect to unless somebody actually publishes a closure transaction.
I don't think that's true. I mean, at least, yeah, like 1 year ago, I was watching the Electrum developers talk, and he said that's exactly, it's a huge privacy trade-off, and that's the issue with that, and they are willing to make it. But
Well, he might have been talking.
Changed since then.
I mean, he might have been talking how they were planning to do it, but I mean, if you go by like an output like hash or an output script hash, then like there's no privacy leak unless that transaction actually hits the chain. Because if you don't have the input to, then you don't know what coins those are.
All right, I will update it on myself, and we'll see. We'll come back to it later. Let's go to another topic that I'm excited about, and you're going to be ranting because
Beep boop, no para brain update.
yeah. So Ledger added native segregated witness support to their Ledger Live desktop wallet, which is much more than you could have asked for. The only thing, Ledger was one of the largest company that still was unable to send to batch 32 addresses, and this caused a lot of headache for me, and well, for me personally, actually, because a lot of support requests. And I actually put out a bounty for a CoinJoin output that whoever implements batch32 sendability, then he gets a 0.1 Bitcoin CoinJoin output. And well, it's not only batch32 sendability, but actually, as I see from the screenshot, it happened literally just, the merge happened literally 2 hours ago. So it's very fresh. You guys will hear about it soon on Twitter from different people. As I see it from the screenshot, you can create accounts, native Segwit and Segwit accounts. I think they don't have legacy accounts. At least you can see it from the screenshot. So this is awesome. I love it. I wouldn't add actually native Segwit support to a wallet I'm developing to, because that would just confuse people. But I mean, it's their decision, and a lot of people want to do that. So okay. Yeah. Now you can have batch32 addresses on your ledger with your ledger live. You can actually have with Wasabi too, but anyway, on your ledger with your ledger live. And the benefit of that it's gonna be cheaper to spend from, and the other part of it is that you will be finally able to send to every wallet out there, every address out there, and that's great. That's about Ledger. What do you guys think?
Cough. ColdCard had it from day one.
Yeah, ColdCard just didn't have proper buttons.
It did if you didn't have that screwy Europe power.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, you can say the same thing of like a lot of cell phones, because I've seen people plug in smartphones, and if they plug it directly into the wall and they try to use their phone while it's charging, the buttons literally just don't, like, it'll get all screwy. So it's not really the ColdCard's fault.
Electricity was invented in Europe, so your power sucks.
Well, you guys did it so bad that we had to fix it over here in America. You guys can't do shit.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so
America needs it because they use too much air conditioning.
Moving on to the next topic, ColdCard is added to bitcoin.org finally. And so the reason was they weren't added to bitcoin.org before, because the buttonless version was just simply not working properly. I was...
You mean European electricity?
I tested both. Yeah, but is it only Europe or like America only?
I think it's America only.
Yeah, so for the majority of the world, it didn't work properly, which is a good enough reason to not add it to bitcoin.org. But now they fixed it, and actually, I'm really pleased with it. I think it's awesome. I tried out both. They sent both, and I think I would use ColdCard if I would use a hardware wallet, and I probably will use it in the near future. So great. It's added to bitcoin.org. Any comment on that, or should I move on to...
I think we can
Still.
say thank you, Cobra, for not being a complete retard. And now we can move on to getting
Okay.
the open dime accurately described on the website, because it's currently listed as a voucher, which is a completely custodial promissory note to redeem for an actual thing, which is like the exact opposite of what an open dime actually is. So maybe you can do that now, Cobra, and stop being a retard about that.
I'm contributing
Well,
to Bitcoin.org, and Cobra has not much to do with it except to just get into the conversation once or twice, but very rarely. So it's like blaming this on him is very unfair.
Oh no, it is very fair, because I've had like 5 conversations with him about this, and he just continues being a complete retard.
I thought we were gonna have like an actual nice comment about it there, where you were like said thank you, Cobra, and then of course like doing not something retarded. Oh yeah, you gotta jab him still. But I mean, like, yeah, there's a bunch of people probably behind the .org, as well as I don't know, behind that Cobra account.
well, since we kind of, I don't know, my comment for the whole ledger situation is it still wouldn't make me want to use their device.
Yeah, but at least they finally did make the move over. But I get you, right? It's like I'm forgetting what the hell. They got some sort of onboard chip problem that I can't remember the name of.
I think, no, Para, wasn't it Peter McCormick who he was using a ledger and he was really confused about Wasabi Wallet because his ledger wouldn't let him send any funds to Wasabi in order to test it out?
I don't know, but I have to admit that I had the most issues with the ledger integration, and they were very, very sneaky issues. It went on the screens. If the screensaver is turned on, then you turn off the screensaver, and then the computer just doesn't see the wallet anymore. So you have to log out of your Bitcoin account and log back again, and this kind of, and a bunch of these kind of issues, and many of them were actually related to, are you logged into your Bitcoin account, because they want to have more accounts, because they want to have all kinds of altcoin accounts there. So that makes this whole thing, I think, much less stable. Adding altcoins to hardware wallet, don't know. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it is a good idea to use the ColdCard and an open dime. They're pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, Tracer, did you hear that? Not such a good idea of the altcoin stuff.
On the other hand, yeah, I forgot to mention that, wow, I got into this trap. I want to mention the name of the developer who created the Segwit integration. Gaten Ranadu. Yeah. So
Good job, Gaten.
shout out to Gaten. Okay, any more comment on this?
Nah, I think I'll have plenty of opportunity to call Cobra an idiot with the next story.
And my final note is that Bitcoin.org finally got a 14 Bitcoin donation, and it's completely deserved. And Janine, let's go to the last story of the day.
Oh, hold on. No. First off, no, it's not well deserved. And second off, I guarantee you that that's just Cobra sending money to himself to try to get people to pay attention to him and send more money.
I mean, in that case, I would say congratulations. That's a really good marketing strategy.
It's following that ICO model, man.
Well, I mean, You cannot verify it, so you mix it with wasabi and now you can do this without anyone noticing it, except Shinobi.
So yeah, Janine, what's going on with the Assange hearing tomorrow?
Yeah, so there are many things that I could probably go over. I'm still updating both of my blog posts on a daily basis, but I want to focus on two things besides the obvious, which is that the procedural hearing is tomorrow. The first one is that it was being reported yesterday evening that Assange has been moved to the medical ward of Belmarsh Prison. However, the details of that are still very murky at this point because it has not been stated when he was moved there, how long he has been there, what he was moved in there for, or whether it was to address, general long-term health issues that he's been dealing with, or whether it was an emergency, like a sudden change. And so we don't know any of this. All we know is that his Swedish attorney was able to visit him in person last Friday, May 24th, for about 2 hours. And that lawyer said that it was difficult to have a normal conversation with him. He said a normal conversation with him was not possible due to health issues. So that's not a good sign, but again, not very much detail. In addition, the text of the Swedish detention order has not been translated into English yet, which means that if he participated in any way in his detention hearing on June 3rd in Uppsala, he would be going in having not read the order in a language that he understands, which is actually a violation of his rights in Sweden. But the pile of rights violations is already so large in this decade-long case that these states probably don't care that they're throwing one more in there. And unfortunately, the Uppsala court, the district court, has declined to extend the date for the hearing, despite his lawyer saying that they need more time. Second, for almost a decade now, there's been a debate about whether Assange is a journalist and whether WikiLeaks is a publisher. And when the Department of Justice released their superseding indictment about a week ago, the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, John Demers, proclaimed that Julian Assange is no journalist. And I just want to say that if there is any more stupid question out there which proves that journalism schools, particularly in the US, offer a terrible quality of education, I think it's important to make clear that this question or determination about whether he's a journalist is actually absolutely irrelevant, because I'm going to read two paragraphs that I've recently written in my blog post where I've been collecting news and analysis on the matter. So it should not be necessary for countless journalists to defend Assange's position as a journalist. It is a grave mistake for any journalist to entertain such a question as, is Assange a real journalist, during a legal discussion about whether his publishing activity is protected under the Constitution, because in fact, as shared by Glenn Greenwald the other day, the First Amendment recognizes no such formal distinctions as real, proper, or traditional, or lack thereof, and for good reason. Because in the opinion of Chief Justice Warren E. Burger, for a case in 1977, it was pointed out that there is no supporting evidence for the interpretation that the press clause of the First Amendment only referred to institutional press. He said, the liberty encompassed by the press clause, although complementary to and a natural extension of the speech clause, merited special mention simply because it had been more often the object of official restraints. Soon after the invention of the printing press, English and continental monarchs, fearful of the power implicit in its use and the threat to establishment thought and order, political and religious, devised restraints such as licensing, censors, indices of prohibited books, and prosecutions for seditious libel, which generally were unknown in the pre-printing press era. Official restrictions were the official response to the new disquieting idea that this invention would provide a means for mass communication. The very task of including some entities within the institutional press, while excluding others, whether undertaken by the legislature, court or administrative agency is reminiscent of the abhorred licensing system of Tudor and Stuart England, a system the First Amendment was intended to ban from this country, end quote. So yeah, we've known for a long time that this, was established case law. And then Elizabeth Goitein and Eric Lewis, who is the chairman of the board for Reprieve US, basically that helps people in Guantanamo Bay, for example, took issue with Demers' statement that Assange is not a journalist. Goitein cited the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Frankfurter in Pennekamp versus Florida in 1946, who said the purpose of the Constitution was not to erect the press into a privileged institution, but to protect all persons in their right to print what they will, as well as to utter it. And so additionally, it does not matter that Assange is not a U.S. citizen because the First Amendment interests extend beyond the rights of the speaker and include the rights of the recipients to access information and ideas. Then in the National Review recently, Kevin Williamson argued that in the absence of this professional caste privilege, we should then be willing to accept that journalists will be prosecuted for publishing classified information, which is in contrast to many other legal arguments in favor of either scrapping the Espionage Act as unconstitutional or amending it to allow for public interest defenses, which is insane, but that still is not possible. So that was that was the end of my very long rant, and tomorrow is going to be a busy day for everyone who cares about these issues, and as usual, I'm going to try to do my best to cover what is going on by updating the second blog post, which is called New Frontiers, Old Barriers.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing, following along with all this and updating it, because it is like going back to earlier, like the beginning of this discussion, as far as people just debating nonsense on Twitter is, it's hard to look into the abyss of what's going on with Assange and what exactly is going on with our governance structure and our rights and liberties as individuals. And, I'm glad that you're, doing that without really any hesitation and, marching up with this, because it is like the most important court case that we've seen in our lifetimes, as far as really questioning or pushing the boundaries on free speech and as well as the free press, and trying to see where that line is, if it's a reality, or is there a line there, and they appear to have found the line that the state is willing to deal with, and the rest of this fight is all about public opinion, and that's why we hear some of these journalists online or on mainstream media not even really understanding what journalism is because this fight is everywhere through the public, and it's important that we get proper information on all this. And I can even admit myself, I don't want to look all the way into it because I know it's upsetting.
I agree. I found myself relying on Jenny and solely on Assange news, because whenever I try to Google or anything, there's just no proper information out there, and I don't have time to to look it up. But here is Janine, and she's just telling you the facts and and dumbing down these complex things, and I really like this.
Yeah, thank you. I've spent enough time reading constantly about this case that I can spot the errors and stuff now well enough. But yeah, pretty much every mainstream media outlet, it's a waste of time to read anything they write about this case. Like, there's always going to be something in there about Assange has been charged or Assange must face charges in Sweden. And it's like, guys, it's been 9 years now, and you still don't know that there has never been a single charge in Sweden ever. Like, I feel like I should just make a tweet where I say the sentence, Julian Assange has never been charged in Sweden, over and over again, because I still get people, I still read it, I still see people, even people who, you know, they support Assange, they will say like, oh, the charges have been dropped. And it's like, no, there has never been any charges. This is a very important point. There has never been any charges. So like, I'm really frustrated having to dig through a bunch of garbage. But after all of this time, I figured out like which sources, you know, if you can't get a basic fact like that right, it's probably not worth reading the rest of it. So it's become a lot easier to, you know, find sources. And I'm always finding new stuff because this is like a really complex, long history with this case. And there's always new things to find.
How did this came around that the Sweden charges, which has not been, so who started it, and you know what's the backstory behind it?
I mean, I think it comes down to the simple thing that, one, it's dealing with a country where, you know, it's another language. You know, if it's not English, there's always bound to be mistakes, and they just get repeated over and over and over again. And also, I just think that journalists don't give a crap about whether they get things accurate, especially in a legal environment. They just don't care because they're not versed in it. They don't care because it doesn't bother them that they might get that wrong. They don't understand the consequences. Like, I had Matthew Green at the end of last year when I reminded him there are no charges, and he came back to me saying, oh, are we going to nitpick about the technical language, which is a very hilarious thing to hear from a person who claims to be, you know, a cryptographer. Technical stuff is very important, Matthew. And especially in law, it's even more crazy and complex that you, like, very important that you get your terms correctly. So I think it's a combination of just, you know, once you had a few outlets at the very beginning, you know, improperly saying there are charges, everyone, it's just an echo chamber. They just keep repeating it because they can always say, look, it said in the Guardian, there are charges. But you don't know that that Guardian is based on a series of Guardian articles that all went back to one Guardian journalist who used the word charges, and then they never corrected it, and it just kept reverberating throughout the entire journalism space. And it's just annoying. Like even when you correct them, it's like some of them, they just don't believe you. Like, they think you're part of a conspiracy to deny that there are charges. And then there are journalists who just don't care. Like, they don't see the importance of making that correction. So it's like multiple factors, like problems in journalism, problems in dealing with a foreign language like Swedish, and, you know, lack of care for accuracy.
Write an article that clarifies this thing, and then write a Twitter bot and a Reddit bot, and I don't know what you can write bots for, that whenever this comes up in a conversation, then your bot is going to comment, oh, by the way, there has never been any charges, and links to that article.
I mean, I don't know if anyone's tried a bot, but there's a page, I think, on his legal defense website that it's like frequently mistaken things or facts of the case. And usually one of the first points in those lists is that there haven't been charges in Sweden. But the problem is then these journalists, when you like share this with them, they'll be like, well, that's an unreliable source because it's his defense website. It's like, oh, so you're saying that you know more about his case than his lawyers or even the plaintiff's lawyer. Like, even she would tell you that there are no charges. You can ask the prosecutor, who literally said in their press release for reopening this investigation, this does not imply that there are charges. People just don't listen.
Oh, that's like such a big problem today. Nobody really wants to dig into the facts, but they'll just take a buzzword and run with it. But yeah, I think that all started. Yeah, it was just like, didn't he like just leave Switzerland, and that's why it was like, oh well, while he was in Switzerland, this thing happened, and then I don't know. I'd have to go back and re-look through it too because it was so long ago now.
You mean in Sweden?
The power of propaganda.
Yeah. sorry.
That's the other thing people get wrong. They think that he like fled. Some of them use the word fled. He fled Sweden to escape charges, which is hilarious because I mean it's disgusting, but it's also hilarious because if you read and like you can even read The Guardian. The Guardian has this in their articles, even though I don't consider them a trustworthy source. At least someone at The Guardian read the actual legal documents and police reports and all of that, and the affidavit, which by the way is punishable by law if he lied in that. He was accused in August. He was interviewed in August. He was then staying in Sweden for, I think, at least a couple of weeks. I don't remember the precise timeline, but I remember the sequence of events. And so he was interviewed, he was released. The investigation was actually closed very quickly because it's actually against the law in Sweden to publish the name of an accused person. Like his name should have never even been in the press in Sweden. And he actually found out that he was accused through the newspaper. So that was a, flagrant violation. And so the case was closed. Then it was reopened by a different prosecutor, and he stayed for a couple of weeks to be available in case there was any further process that they needed to go through and see whether they were going to charge him. And so he's waiting and waiting, and then eventually gets to the point where, he has things to do because, WikiLeaks is doing releases. And so he asks the prosecutor if he can leave the country, and she gives him permission to leave. So he leaves in September. And then in December, she issues a European arrest warrant, which, by the way, under at least UK law, that's actually not something that their regular extradition law recognizes, because European arrest warrants are supposed to be issued or authorized, whatever the correct word is. They're supposed to be authorized by a judge, not a prosecutor, specifically the prosecutor who is trying to prosecute him. So there was this whole debate then in 2011 over whether the arrest warrant was even legitimate, because it was issued by someone that the UK law shouldn't recognize as a legitimate person to do that. And the UK judge decided that she was in fact legitimate because the French version of the word public authority or judge, it also applies to prosecutors. So the UK judge relied on the authority of the French interpretation of the law to basically keep Assange under house arrest. And then to extradite, and then try to extradite him. It's pretty insane. Like the level of insanity in this case is amazing.
That's where I'm saying it's just like the fight of our lifetime. I mean, nobody has ever seen them go after someone on this level. And that's why nobody really wants to completely pay attention to it, or they want to help, advance their position within the current system, and they're playing ball with it. And yeah, just hope everything goes well tomorrow. But for sure, I know that you'll be updating us with it.
All right. Final thoughts?
I think it's that time. Rick,
All right.
you're up.
Yeah, my only final thought is really quick, just your monthly reminder, go support your local meetups. You got to meet up in the area. You haven't been in a while. Go check in on everybody, see how they're doing, keep building that community on the ground.
Yeah, and turn the shitcoiners into bitcoiners. My final thought is that we yesterday, Lontivero Lucas tweeted that there was actually a coin join with 99 participants, which is awesome. How about you, Shinobi?
I wish I was on the beach.
Yeah, that'll happen soon enough, man. Just a reminder to everyone, we've only got a couple more episodes before our little break, and so maybe Shinobi will get his beach time then.
And Janine?
Yeah, I don't know, Shinobi, if you can share the thing that I just put in the chat box.
But then I have to click buttons.
Oh my god.
Hold on. Ding.
So this was just a tweet that I saw the other day that I find extremely hilarious. If you don't know, Jason Leopold is someone who does a lot of freedom of information requests, and he said, "This is the lengthiest redaction I've ever received in all my years of filing requests from the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel." And he was looking for documents relating to or referring to the Obama-era targeted killing memorandum. And if you click on the first email, literally the only thing, the picture, the only thing that you see in the entire email is one introductory sentence saying, "Here is my proposed email to Larry Tribe on the blank question." And then the entire thing is blanked out because, of course, the state does not want you to know these things.
It's crazy.
Yep. Well, so much for the land of the free, everybody. I guess we will see you in fascist land next Wednesday. Adios.
Later, everyone.
Party like it's 1984.